If Apollo 13 had been a close scrape for the Americans, it was humiliating to the Russians. Not only had they lost the race to the moon, they'd watched the Americans turn disaster into triumph, all live on television. The Russians' compulsive secrecy had gained them nothing. Razzmatazz American style looked better, so that's what they tried. Now their missions would go out live to the Russian people, and their cosmonauts would become household names. But the Soviets were plagued again by disaster, and their first attempt at space ballet ended in tragedy. In 1971, 3 cosmonauts were sent to Salyut 1, an orbiting space station. They spent more than 3 weeks up in space. They became television personalities, national celebrities who performed their antics in zero gravity. But off-screen, things weren't happy. First-time mission commander Georgy Dobrovolsky continually clashed with his more experienced crew. They set an endurance record, 24 days. But staying in space has never been as hazardous as going back to Earth. When the time came to return, the crew were worried, and they had every reason to be. As explosive bolts separated the 3 modules of the Soyuz spacecraft, a valve shattered. There was a leak. Precious air began to be sucked from the capsule into the vacuum of space. Dobrovolsky and his crew struggled to find the leak, but they couldn't.
It's like a kid's balloon. Inflate it and then you stick it with a needle. Immediately all the air goes out of this balloon. But it is so small that if you knew where it is, you could simply cover it with the palm of your hand.
From the ground, everything looked normal. The capsule had made its re-entry and was lazily parachuting to Earth. Lazily and silently.
No report was coming from a spaceship. Of course we were worried, but the rescue team report wasn't encouraging. They reported on the radio that they say that we see the lander. It all works well on the main parachute. It goes down and the rescue helicopters going to the landing site. And just in 2 minutes after the lander was on the ground, the rescue teams were running to the lander. In another 2 minutes, they opened the cover and they saw the cosmonauts sitting in the seats, but with bluish spots on their faces and blood spilled from noses and ears.
The Soviet Union had chosen the worst possible time to go public. The Russian people had taken the 3 cosmonauts to their hearts. Now these men lay dead on the steppes of Kazakhstan. The cost in human lives of conquering space was rising. So far, 135 men had died, most of them Russian. But the Americans were also to experience grief on a national scale. Cape Canaveral, 1986. It was a freezing cold January day, and the Space Shuttle Challenger waited on the launch pad. A crew of 7 was on board, among them a civilian. Krista McAuliffe, a schoolteacher who had won her place in a national competition organized by NASA to boost interest in the shuttle.
When I'm up in that shuttle, and I'm not going to be teaching at Concord High School, I want everybody working real hard to make education what it should be in this country. Thank you very much.
The launch had already been delayed several times, and now the freezing weather was causing concern. McAuliffe and the rest of the crew didn't realize it, but behind the scenes there had been acrimonious arguments about whether the shuttle's booster rockets were safe to use in low temperatures. The morning of the launch was worryingly cold, but NASA decided to risk it. All over the US, people tuned in to see the New England schoolteacher and her colleagues go into orbit. In the crowd at Cape Canaveral were McAuliffe's family and friends, as well as her backup, Barbara Morgan, who would have been on Challenger if McAuliffe had somehow been unable to fly. At first, everything seemed fine.
Roll program confirmed. Challenger now heading downrange. We'll throttle down to 65%.
A minute passed, and then Mission Control issued a routine but fateful instruction.
Challenger, go and throttle up. Challenger, go and throttle up.
Flight GC, we've had negative contact, lost downlink.
Okay, all operators, watch your data carefully. Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
Flight Fido.
Go ahead.
RSO reports vehicle exploded.
Copy.
The crew compartment took 2 minutes to drop into the ocean. All 7 crew were killed. Engineers had warned NASA not to launch in freezing weather. They said that rubber seals in the booster engines, called O-rings, might fracture in the cold. And fracture they did. Video footage of the launch shows a plume of black smoke as the rubber rings, meant to seal the joints between the booster sections, begin leaking. Leaking fuel. At the command throttle up, the fuel ignites, and the main rocket explodes. Over a decade later, and shuttles now upgraded make routine flights into space. But space experts know that it's just a matter of time.
It's inevitable that there will be a major accident. Even NASA sort of projects a catastrophic failure, 1 in 68 launches, and we have to be prepared to accept it or prepared to deal with that when it happens. The one thing we can't do is pretend that it's not going to happen.